Today I'd like to talk about the hardest church teaching. It's a teaching that all Christian denominations agreed on up until the last 100 years. But because of an increasing societal pressure, one denomination after the other abandoned this teaching. But one denomination refuses to yield, even though 98% of its own members don't obey it. And the teaching I'm talking about is contraception. In this video, I'll explore why the Catholic Church still stands firm in condemning contraception. I'll address the most common objections against this teaching, and at the very end, I'll also share my thoughts on this teaching as a young Catholic woman. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, this is a difficult teaching. So why on earth does the Catholic Church teach that contraception is immoral? There are actually multiple reasons, and I'd like to present 3 of those briefly. I'll start with the weakest argument, and I will end with the strongest one. Interestingly, the biblical foundation of this teaching led a well-known formerly Protestant couple to convert to Catholicism, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. First of all, there are practical reasons against contraception because its use causes certain societal problems. St. Pope Paul VI predicted in his landmark encyclical Humanae Vitae that the use of contraception will have the following societal consequences: marital infidelity, moral decline, increased objectification of women, and governmental coercion in reproductive matters. Marital infidelity and moral decline follow from the fact that sexual sins obviously have fewer immediate consequences with contraception. For example, without contraception, it's much easier to say no to premarital sex because this sin could have consequences for the next 18 years. Regarding the increased objectification of women, the Pope wrote the following: "A man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to a woman and, disregarding her physical and emotional equilibrium, reduce her to being a mere instrument for the satisfaction of his own desires, no longer considering her as his partner, whom he should surround with care and affection." I don't think that it would be a stretch to say that sexual objectification of women and also sexual self-objectification by women has reached new heights in recent decades. Finally, an example of governmental coercion would be the one-child policy in China. So the Pope was right with all of his predictions. A second argument why the Catholic Church is opposed to contraception is because contraception violates natural law. Arguments from natural law determine the purpose of things by examining their nature. So basically, you can look at the nature of something and the purpose of something and then determine what the correct use of that thing would be. To give you an example, eating has the purpose of nourishing the body, and because of that, it would be disordered to throw up food after eating. Now, what's the natural purpose of sex? Sex has 2 purposes. The first one is very obvious: sex is for procreation, but there's also a second purpose, namely that sex is for the unity of the couple. The hormones that get released during sex bond the couple together, which benefits both them and their children. Excluding one purpose is a violation of the nature of sex, and contraception is a clear example of excluding the procreative purpose of sex. You might be wondering now whether this means that sex should only be had with the direct intention of making babies, and I'll get to that point in the part where I talk about objections. Now, the last argument against contraception that I'd like to talk about today, and that's in my opinion the most convincing and beautiful argument, is that contraception violates the nature of love. In my last video, I deduced this in detail, but for those who haven't watched that video yet, here's a quick summary of the argument. God is love. Humans are made in His image. Since there is one God in 3 persons, the so-called Trinity, God is a communion of persons. From this it follows that humans reflect God the best when they are in communion. The closest communion humans can enter into is sex. This means that sex is meant to be an expression of love. Also, since God is 3 divine persons united in one, this means that the love that humans are meant to reflect is supposed to be unitive. And since God is love and He created the universe and ultimately humans out of love, the love which sex is meant to reflect is also supposed to be procreative. This is what sex is meant to express: love. Unitive and procreative love, which are inextricably linked. It's also crucial to understand that marriage is a covenant and not a contract. This means that marriage is not an exchange of goods and services, but an exchange of persons. At the altar, spouses make a total gift of themselves to each other, and sex is meant to express that. But using contraception contradicts the notion of a total gift of self. Sex is meant to express the wedding vows through the body, so it's meant to say, I love all of you with all of my being, and I will always love you. And I'm open to perpetuate our love into eternity by bringing an immortal soul into this world. This is why the Catholic Church teaches that contraception is morally wrong, because contraception excludes the procreative aspect of marital love. In line with this, the Church also teaches that IVF is morally wrong because it in turn excludes the unitive aspect of procreation. So in the end, the best argument for chastity, including marital chastity, is that it makes for better love. Now, at the beginning of this video, I mentioned a well-known formerly Protestant couple that converted to Catholicism because they recognized the biblical foundation of that teaching. The couple I was talking about are Kimberly and Scott Hahn. Their biblical reason to reject contraception was exactly this, that marriage is a covenant and not a contract. If you're interested to learn more about their conversion story, you can check out this video. Now let's get to possible objections or questions that might arise regarding this topic. Namely, what about responsible family planning? Natural family planning is permitted by the Church, but isn't that the same as contraception? What about infertile couples? Or what about the argument that contraception reduces the number of abortions? And what about diseases that can only be treated with contraceptive pills? Before I get to these questions, I'd like to address another important issue. It has been brought to my attention that most of you aren't subscribed to this channel. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, and in return, I promise that I will listen to your feedback and improve this channel video by video. Now let's get to the question, what about responsible family planning? While the Catholic Church prohibits the use of artificial contraception, it must be pointed out that it's still important to plan families responsibly. The goal of marriage isn't just procreation, but also education of the children that result from the marriage. Apart from that, children should also be provided with dignified living conditions and sufficient emotional care. All of that is only possible with responsible family planning. This can and should be achieved through so-called natural family planning, or NFP, which takes advantage of the naturally occurring infertile periods in a woman's cycle. The Catholic Church encourages research in this area so that couples can plan their families with greater precision. So NFP doesn't have to rely on the calendar method alone. Rather, any currently available method to determine a woman's infertile window can be used. However, the Church teaches that the couple must have just reasons for spacing births. Pope Pius XII used the phrasing well-grounded reasons and grave reasons, and Saint Pope Paul VI used the phrase serious motives. The popes list the following possible reasons. Pope Paul VI mentions the physical or psychological condition of husband or wife and external circumstances. And Pope Pius XII adds medical, eugenic, economic, and social reasons. The part about eugenics might sound like the Church is saying people with certain genetic risks shouldn't have kids, but read in light of the earlier encyclical Casti Connubii by Pope Pius XI, who was the immediate predecessor of Pope Pius XII, it's clear that this is not what is meant at all. Rather, it means that people with certain genetic risks can choose to use NFP for that reason. Pope Pius XII also added that these well-grounded reasons don't arise rarely. So a couple doesn't have to be at its absolute physical, emotional, and financial limit to be justified in using NFP. The reasons to do so must be well-grounded. Here I'd like to point out that no form of contraception, neither artificial nor natural, has a 100% effectiveness rate. So the only way to avoid a pregnancy with a 100% certainty is abstinence. By the way, for the sake of completeness, I would like to mention that withdrawal, also called coitus interruptus, is considered immoral by the Catholic Church. The next question I'd like to address is what the difference is between NFP and contraception. Why does the Church prohibit contraception but permits NFP? While it's true that both methods are used to avoid a pregnancy, there are some significant differences. First of all, NFP relies on the couple exercising self-control, while contraception promotes intemperance. Second of all, NFP respects the female body because it cooperates with its natural rhythm instead of treating a woman's fertility like a disease. And finally, NFP doesn't violate natural law, just like counting calories doesn't violate the nature of eating. Saint Pope Paul VI writes the following in his encyclical Humanae Vitae. Neither the Church nor her doctrine is inconsistent when she considers it lawful for married people to take advantage of the infertile period, but condemns as always unlawful the use of means which directly prevent conception, even when the reasons for the latter practice may appear to be upright and serious. In reality, these two cases are completely different. In the former, the married couple rightly use a faculty provided them by nature. In the latter, they obstruct the natural development of the generative process. It cannot be denied that in each case the married couple, for acceptable reasons, are both perfectly clear in their intention to avoid children and wish to make sure that none will result. But it is equally true that it is exclusively in the former case that husband and wife are ready to abstain from intercourse during the fertile period as often as for reasonable motives the birth of another child is not desirable. And when the infertile period occurs, they use their married intimacy to express their mutual love and safeguard their fidelity toward one another. In doing this, they certainly give proof of a true and authentic love. Regarding the distinction between NFP and contraception, one could also use a very vivid example and say that this difference behaves like the difference between killing grandma and waiting until she dies. The result is the same, but the means are very different. Now let's get to the next question. Can infertile couples make love according to Catholic doctrine? The answer is yes. And if you think about the 3 reasons against contraception I explained at the beginning of this video, none of them apply to naturally infertile couples. But what about the argument that contraception leads to fewer abortions because fewer unplanned children are born? First of all, there is some evidence that contraception might actually lead to more abortions. This stems from the fact that with contraception, people engage in the act of baby making while not even being close to a position where they could welcome a potential child. This is the so-called Peltzman effect, which describes the phenomenon that people engage in more risky behaviors the more safety measures there are. Second of all, even if contraception always led to fewer abortions, doing something intrinsically evil can't be justified with a good intention or a good effect. Also, the principle of double effect doesn't apply here because the good effect of reducing abortions is brought about directly by the evil effect, namely contraception, and so the evil effect would be directly intended here, which isn't morally permissible. The last question I'd like to get to briefly regards the treatment of diseases that are treated with contraceptives. In this case, the Church permits the use of contraception because of the principle of double effect, as the intention is to cure a disease and the contraceptive aspect is an unintended byproduct. Finally, as promised, I'd like to share some personal thoughts on this teaching. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, this is a difficult teaching. And by difficult, I don't necessarily mean difficult to accept, because the Catholic Church has good reasons to oppose contraception. By difficult, I mean difficult in the execution. But let's remember that the primary vocation of every human is to become a saint, and that marriage is supposed to help the couple become saints together. In my opinion, the Church's teaching on contraception is a great opportunity to practice virtue and consequently grow in holiness. Also, the more I observe what happens when you follow God's will, the more I realize the truth of this quote from St. Alphonsus. Beyond the possibility of a doubt, God works to effect our welfare infinitely better than we could ever hope to accomplish or desire it ourselves. The beauty I see in the Church's teaching on contraception is that it shows us the importance and attractiveness of self-control. If someone is unable to say no, their yes means nothing. This is true on so many levels, and it's also true in the case of sexual self-control. And from a woman's perspective, I think that self-control is sexy. And this also seems to be true from a man's perspective. Take a listen to what Jordan Peterson has to say on the matter.
I don't think there's anything more attractive to a man than a sophisticated woman who knows how to say no. Like that's top of the stack as far as men are concerned.
I'd like to end this video with a quote from G.K. Chesterton. The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. That's been it for today. See you soon. God bless and bye!